Welcome. You found CISO Stressed, brought to you by SCYTHE, a bi-weekly conversation with CISOs on those topics that are top of mind, hosted by me, Liz Wharton. It's dangerous to go alone. Join the conversation on SCYTHE's YouTube channel or the CISO Stressed audio streaming wherever you listen to podcasts. Listen in and come join us. Welcome everyone to CISO Stressed. I'm your host, Liz Wharton. We're brought to you by SCYTHE and joined today by Shawn Bowen. And Shawn, we were joking before we started recording, and of course your full bio will be in the show notes. But you don't have just one, and sometimes I'll joke that I have a problem with children, or you don't have just one. You are the CISO for Restaurant Brands International, and with that you have multiple responsibilities, or shall we say children under your watch. And God bless and Godspeed for being able to keep up. And what's your secret? First of all, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. No secret. I think your background says exactly what my secret is. It's a nonstop stress. So it's different. I came from the government, a lot of my years in the government doing cybersecurity. It was nice because I had a template of here's what needs to be done because some law or some senior or higher headquarters said so. And now it's a lot of influencing the user of what they need to do. And to your point with the three brands, Popeyes, Burger King, and Tim Hortons, the structure is relatively the same between them, but their methodology about going about things, or also the franchisees that are bought into the particular brands, are different levels of maturity as a business. So some businesses, some franchisees will say, "Oh, I don't understand the purpose of cybersecurity. We only own a couple of restaurants. There's no value to this. So we don't want to pay that extra dollar. We're barely making ends meet." And we have other franchisees that have thousands of restaurants, and they want to own it all themselves, their IT, their security, and everything. So from a franchisee perspective, there's a lot of influencing and getting the coalition to kind of understand what's going on. And then on the back end, we also develop our own app, both web app and mobile app. And so that's an internal development for those brands. And it's all a single code base across the brands, which makes life a little bit easier. But obviously there are different privacy factors that come into play because we have the international market, we have Canada's privacy laws, PIPEDA and CCPA in California, GDPR as we expand into Europe. And so each one of those have little nuances, whether it's privacy by design, or if it's privacy by default, or if it's an opt-out, in scenario. So trying to build a single solution for all of those definitely causes you to go a little bit schizophrenic at times.
I can imagine. And when you came in with military background, there's SOPs that have been developed over decades and decades. And then with chain of command, I have said this, yes, you may disagree, but you understand I most likely am going to smile, nod, and go and carry forth what I have just asked you to do. So how do you take that then translating where you've got, as you noted, franchisees who are going in different directions or have their own operating procedures? Did you have to create the SOPs when you came into this position, or were some of them already in place?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll jump into that in a second. When you kind of talked about the differences between the military or the government or an organization that's kind of been very security conscious, maybe not IT security, but security conscious, physical security, wherever that might be, that allows the translation to cybersecurity a little bit easier. Whereas when you come into an organization as kind of their first CISO, or their actual first CISO, it's a little bit different, because what is second nature to those in the government or in the military is not second nature to people who've never served or never been in that environment. So first, just teaching them about basic security thought process and why it matters, because the analogy I always use is because I'm in Miami, is I'm a helmet salesman, and everyone that I work with is riding mopeds in their beachwear with no helmets, and none of them have crashed. So why do they need to buy a helmet? And then even if they do buy a helmet, it's a compliance-based helmet, so it's minimal and it doesn't save them from anything. So there's a lot of explanation and counsel of here's the value that if you do this little thing, what that will prevent. And until they know someone, so it's a lot of experience-based learning, which is stressful for me, because I refer to it as managing via "I told you so." That's not a very good way to keep your job. So trying to get ahead of that. And to your point, from the SOPs and some of the other structure that exists. So we obviously have some structure in our agreements, our franchisee agreements, and then we also have some structure internal, because people kind of know the right thing to do. What doesn't really exist is good, repeatable security practices that you can use over and over. We did have a lot of policies and a lot of plans in place, but it was either outsourced developed or in-source developed by people who are kind of doing what they think is the right thing, which is good. That's what we need. We want people to do the right thing, just do the next right thing without direction. So that kind of, in a military term, that's, commander's intent is, the intent is to do something. I didn't tell you exactly what to do, just achieve the end result. So that's still in place here. Tons of great, hardworking people, super intelligent, and can take on things that are completely foreign to them, which is really incredible to witness here. And then it's just about kind of guiding them of what things are most important and what things we need to build it, and why we need that. Because that for me is the biggest piece. If I can explain to them why there's a value to this, because I'm taking away value in a sense, right? I'm a nonprofit generating organization. So like, how do I show that this is going to protect their profits?
Well, and those are the situations where you hate to see breaches or incidents with someone else or with another company, but being able to point to it and say, see where this costs them. Like, again, I told you so. And how do you have to kind of bite your tongue when you see some of that going, or is it a teachable moment?
So I don't really think that those are as educational as people think they are. It's easy to go, oh, well, see Home Depot, or see, even within our space, if I refer to another company, it's very easy to go, well, they do it differently than us, or whatever it might be. There's always a reason. The example I've always used for this, it was more, started using an example with protecting yourself online, just talking to regular people. But I use it with like heartbreak. And now that I have a little girl, a 10-month-old girl, I can use it with children also. But with heartbreak, I think that one's a little bit more uniform for even those that don't have children. Particularly a guy, more so than women, I think guys don't empathize very well. When we watch a movie, we watch a romantic movie, and a girl breaks up with the guy. We who have never been through a breakup are going to say, "Oh, dude, just get up, like, man. Well, forget about her, just move on. It's not that big of a deal," because we don't physically see any damage to that person, and we don't understand what they're going through until you've been through a breakup and you've had your heart broken. Mm-hmm. Then you go, oh, I know exactly what that feels like, and that starts to tug at you. And so using that parallelism to a breach, I can watch someone else get breached, and you're just like, oh, from the outside, they're still selling what they're selling, or they're still operating to an extent, and I'm sure there's lots of cleanup, but we don't really understand the pain that comes into our life during a cleanup or response until it happens to you. So yeah, there's a little bit of like, see, that would suck if that happens to us, but there's also there's nothing like experience, unfortunately.
Well, yes. And as y'all are looking at branching into or developing or focusing on, say, the mobile app, or coming up with cool ideas for, just pushing out the product, or even just the management of all of the systems and stuff, so the internal facing side, how do you have those conversations that, okay, have we considered what are the privacy aspects? We have a lot of information that are passing through. How do you start those conversations when the technology itself is not the main focus of the company?
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll expand on that a little bit based off of I think it was pre-recording. We kind of talked about the difference between a tech company versus a non-tech company. Even though, we can consider ourselves a tech company that sells food or whatever. But using that to the people that you're talking about, how do I influence those people? Which one's easier is kind of the question that's always between CISOs. And I think that's depending on who the CISO is. For me, I think it's easier to influence a user who is uninitiated to the cybersecurity world than to take a technologist and try to explain to them why what they're doing is not the best security practice. Because it's just easier to start with a blank slate than to try to redraw an existing pattern, right? So taking someone who's spent, however many years in education, being taught how to do engineering, software development, whatever it might be, and then which unfortunately higher educations do not include security the way they should, in my opinion, as part of their programs. And then also when they just kind of are developing, they are building something, and now I'm coming in and saying you have to build it differently. And Dave Eslick, who's now the CISO for Chipotle, said something that was phenomenally groundbreaking for me. Software developers are artists. They're not engineers. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2. It is, here's a shade of color, and they can achieve the same result 15 different ways. And now you're coming in and telling them they're wrong when art is subjective. So how do you kind of influence that type of mentality into doing a very structured security approach? And so for me, it's trying to explain to them just one iteration better than their previous iteration from security standard, kind of having them go through the cleanup. And this is where I think DevOps or DevSecOps is a valuable approach if you have the people involved from the dev piece involved in the security and the ops piece. And that's the key. A lot of times it's DevOps and just means two people are on the same team. One's a dev, one's an ops. That's not the idea. It's not splitting up the work. So it's really trying to influence them. It would be, and that gap between education, between security and IT is close. And then between IT and users is pretty far. And if I can influence that first wave, then I have more ambassadors, because everyone in the, all the users and all the customers are going to go to the engineering and the developers and say, can you build this for me? Because they get something cool out of it. They're not going to come to me and go, I want something secure. Can you ask them to build it for me? So they're going to go to so I want to educate that first line of who's providing a product to the customer internal to our company. I want to go to I want them to be an advocate of security. And when a customer comes in and says, can you build me a new app, or can you build me a new website, or new capability or whatever, then they are saying, hey, we need to think about this from a security perspective. So it's even if it's just include me in the meeting, then I have that opportunity to share the extra work, because I don't want the engineering saying, oh, it'll only take 2 weeks to build. And then it gets thrown over the fence to me and it's 2 more weeks to secure. No, it should be 4 weeks to build. Done. So.
Well, and it seems like the integration of all the pieces of the conversation really comes into play, and almost making it, how easy can you make it for each side? And kind of the click and play, drop in this, drop in that, okay, just training as part of the communication process of, don't forget this, ask this question, and building out that model. So has it, what do you feel has really resonated when you're having those conversations? Have you found that bringing out this approach, or do you have kind of the go-to? Because I really liked the artistic analogy of that. Have you found something that's really resonated within your own teams?
So in general, I try to say, how would you, rather than you should do. I will admit there are times where my frustration levels are a little bit higher. That is much more, you need to do. And I try not to do that. But it's, if I ask them how they would do or how they should do things, then it's a little bit more of them thinking, and I can coach them to the answer I want to get to, or have you thought about this and approach. And so there's a little bit of that. But to the checklist kind of, here's a list of questions idea, I think that that's a good framework. The concern I have with it is when you have someone who's maybe not as, doesn't have as much experience in security, they are going to go through the list and then they're kind of done. And they haven't learned that critical thinking skill to think outside the box and go, oh, there's 12 questions, but based off of the answer to 7, there should be a 7B or 7C, piece on it. So I like checklists. I like those because they're frameworks. I'm a fan of the book Checklist Manifesto. If you're into that type of stuff. But at the same time, it's what the purpose of that checklist is. It's in aviation. You'll do a pre-flight check and you'll say, check the fuel. I checked it, but was it empty or full? Like,
Yeah.
now you have to, I checked it, done. Like, is that really what you want to do? And so as you ingest new security or new tools and you want to apply security to it, there's a lot of breadth to it. And unfortunately, I think that that's part of our problem. It's not our problem necessarily to solve, but we obviously have to solve it, is the uninitiated, the CIOs or the COOs, CFOs, they want us all to dumb down the language, and sorry for offending them. They want us to water down the language, or a nicer way to say it, so that they can understand it. But that doesn't happen for, finance. You still have to learn the terms OPEX and CapEx, et cetera, to try to get your money, or you need to learn the different components of the restaurant to get security, get IT in there. But they want security to be explained to them in plain language. And it's like, well, I can go to the finance person and go, give me money things, and so you have to learn a little bit to it. So starting easy, I like the NIST cybersecurity framework. I can very easily give them, here's 5 functions. But then they go, oh, well, that's easy. And you go, no, there's actually 108 subcategories when we dig into it. Like, calm down, or when you do the Lockheed cyber kill chain, 7 steps. But then when you apply that to either the MITRE ATT&CK framework or the unified framework or unified kill chain, it gets massive. And how do you educate them that both the simplicity but also the complexities, and that's part of those questions, I think, as you expose them little by little. You start with the same 5, and then you kind of expose little by little. And I think over time, your regular customers are going to absorb it. So that's my hope, at least.
Well, it's funny when you mentioned the MITRE ATT&CK, like even looking at the cheat sheets that everyone always tries to put together. And I was like, you realize it's no longer really a cheat sheet as more a cheat wall. Yeah. And if you tried to print it out, it would take up your entire, but I think that demonstrates part of the complexity. As you said, there's the surface, and then let's think beyond the surface. Let's look at what are the inspirational posters where it's the iceberg, but you only see the tip above. And while, trite and, I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff, but it does illustrate the point. And so as both, I imagine both you have the internal view, but also the external. I mean, you go to restaurants, you go, or drive-throughs, at least. I know we can't really do restaurants as much these days, but does that help? Does that make the conversation easier for you and for your team to say, think of, the customer, as the customer experience of, hey, we've all done this. We all use apps. We all do this. How put on that hat, and does that help within your job?
Absolutely. So I would probably say the last 18 months or so, my theme everywhere I've talked or even internally, my thought process is digital empathy. That's kind of been my focus, is how do you demonstrate digital empathy for your users? And sometimes that is the IT people, the developers, and sometimes it's the actual end customer. But yeah, that digital empathy from a security, so IT people need to do that, right? As the development, when they develop an app for the users to do, it has to have some level of digital empathy, AKA user experience. That's what they're trying to do, a positive user experience. From IT security perspective, you have to do the same thing. I don't want 15 character passwords with MFA every time plus biomet, like that doesn't get us to the same experience, that customer experience. We have to tailor things, and that's again goes back to that complexity of, well, why can't you just do security the same across the board? In reality, it's to give you good security, just like a good helmet, back to that analogy, is I need to fit it to you and what you're doing, where your environment is, and that just requires a ton of work. But luckily in this case, being a customer of our product, then I get to see that experience. And some cases that's not the case. When CISOs are a CISO of something that they don't use, I do think that makes it a little bit more difficult for them to kind of empathize. Not saying it's not possible. It requires an extra level of effort to really understand what the user is going through. But any CISO one thing our company does is 3 days a year, normal years, right? Normal years, not COVID years. You go to the restaurant. Everybody in the company works in the restaurant, and you do your time, and you get grounded with what the actual end result is. So the same thing. I think in the government we call it, or it was referred to as management by walking the windows. Basically, walk around from where you are and go see people out where you're at. And that's the same thing, is we have a responsibility to experience what the customer is doing. And if you just come in and immediately try to implement all your things without going through it, you're doing it wrong. I personally don't have an admin account. I don't mind being a beta tester for the things, but I don't want any special privileges. And they are always trying to, we'll install this for you. I'm like, no, if everyone else doesn't get it, I shouldn't get it.
Yeah. No, I mean,
I want to know the pain.
Well, and that was one of the first things when I came into SCYTHE, is I had the engineering team walk me through, which became a big joke because it for a while was a trending hashtag with it, if nothing else within our team. So easy, even a lawyer can do it, because I created, and admittedly through my fault, nothing else, almost detonated some malware on my own computer, because I was like, oh, look at this. But going through and having that experience, getting that hands-on, okay, this is what we're doing. This is how, okay, now I see how all these pieces get together or fit together. And so when I'm doing part of my work, so do you pull in kind of going up the food chain? Do you bring in that to the conversation within the C-suite and kind of getting them to understand this is why, I understand, you built it below. How do you bring that above?
Yeah, so I gotta be very careful of how I word this.
Yes.
Right?
Hypothetically,
Hypothetically,
if I was going to do that in a large multinational company, how would you suggest that I go about doing that?
Well, so I think it's twofold, obviously, right? I think good leadership is being involved and taking time. I'm not saying I don't have good leadership. I have a lot of respect for the leaders I work for. But I think taking the time to sit through what someone's pain is that works for you is a good start. So you mentioned it, and you hear these stories all the time about, we should make an educational program, and then someone responds with, well, you came to me, right? And that's what you did, right? That's the small little piece in your story that gets overlooked, is you went to the team and said, walk me through this. That is a leadership position, saying to people and saying, I want to be part of the team. I want credibility. I might not have the ability, but I want credibility. And I think that goes a long way. And when leadership just wants to listen to your output and your reports and are you red, yellow, or green in the status, they are measuring that progress by not by quantity but by quality, and or sorry, not by quality but by quantity. And that gets us away from what we're trying to do. Like there's no quality there because they're not invested in what their team's doing. So luckily, when I have an incident, I go to my CIO and I can talk and go explain. And I remember the first major incident we had, a friend of mine at a threat intelligence company gave me a call and said, hey, something's going on the dark web, something's being sold. And I briefed him on it. And the response was, this sounds like something a vendor would say to try to get in. I'm like, no, all right, let me back up and give you the academic. Here's how the real world works in the dark web, and explain the whole thing. And he goes, okay, like, I don't know. And I said, all right, this is a very good friend of mine. Like we've attended personal weddings together. Like we know, like, this is not a guy trying to make a sell. They're going to give it to us pro bono. And that opened his eyes of going, okay, so there is a whole thing going on in the criminal side of cyber stuff. So it was one of those things where it just takes some time for them to listen, but they have to want to listen, right? You can't force it down their throats. But there is that same thing. Like I try to request one-on-ones, and one thing I ask is, how much time can I have of yours if I send you something? And they normally say, 15 minutes. I say, all right, I'm not going to abuse that. But if I find an article or something, and one of them is my my general counsel. So she is always open for stuff. So if something comes up that's somewhat related to what her interests are from cybersecurity, I will actually copy the words and put it into count the words in Microsoft Word, and get the word count, put that in the average calculator to see average time read, and say, okay, this should take 7 minutes. And I send her the link or PDF or whatever it is. And in my subject line, I say 7 minutes, 7-minute read. And then I explain what it is, so that I can hey, I know I only get a little bit of time to educate you. Here's 7 minutes to educate it. And she probably reads a lot faster than that. I'll continue saying 7 minutes or whatever the length is. Because I have found one thing with lawyers is you guys read really quick.
Yes. But the downside is, like, outside of work stuff, I'm like, oh God, do I have to read something else? So that
YouTube videos, got it.
Right. Yeah. So the other downside is one of my decompression things, I would go and I would read a lot of pleasure books and stuff like that. And so really great conversation. Thank you so much for all you've done and shared with us, and kind of to bring it. And I warned you this was coming. Because with every one of our CISO stressed, as I've been told, we need to end on a positive note. So since I no longer have I don't read as much for pleasure, but when you take stressed and flip it backwards, you get desserts. So in a dessert being a way to cap off a meal. How do you cap off your day? So you've obviously educated your team. You've shared some, dropped some knowledge bombs with the general counsel. How do you cap off your day and kind of battle the stressed side of the role?
Well, so my normal escape is skydiving. My wife and I will go skydiving because if I'm thinking about anything else, my priorities are wrong. But a standard day, I obviously come home now I stay home with my wife and daughter, and I get to spend time with her after she goes to sleep. I will surf some Reddit and I'll learn something. I try to watch some YouTube videos. I try to do Ben Franklin's 5-hour rule, learn something new 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. And so I try to learn something new, and then if I can have a dessert, we'll make some homemade vanilla ice cream, and maybe I'll play some Xbox with my brother, who's back on the West Coast. So
yeah, that's awesome. So and And of course, and hopefully you'll join us again in the future, and in which case we need to delve into ice cream recipes
Yeah.
and toppings that y'all do with vanilla. But anyway, thanks so much. And if someone wants to get more insights, where can they find your musings? Or LinkedIn a good place, Twitter a
Yeah.
good place, or
I'm more of a troll on Twitter and the other social medias, but I'm a little bit more involved on LinkedIn. So hit me up on LinkedIn. I have no problem chatting if you want to talk.
well, thank you. And thanks for joining us on CISO Stressed, and glad that your way to cap off a day, or your way to decompress from the stress, is to throw yourself out of a perfectly good airplane along with your wife. So I'd say y'all are jumping from the frying pan into the fire, but I like it.
Thanks.
No, thank you.
Thanks for having me.